If we were voting, it will all be blue, and there are no blue buttons. Can we start? So, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is José María Figueres, and I am here as your moderator at this press event representing the High Seas Alliance, Mission Blue, and Ocean Unite, of which I am a co-chair. We have three objectives this morning that we would like to share with you. The first one is to highlight the importance of what is happening this week here at the UN in terms of the meeting of the PrepCom, the Preparatory Committee, which is meeting for the fourth time. All of this work leading towards a binding instrument under UNCLOS, the Law of the Seas Convention, on conserving and sustainable use of biodiversity in those areas that are beyond national jurisdiction. The second objective of this press event is to share with you some insights that are coming out of a new scientific report highlighting the importance of the high seas to the good health of the ocean and the better livelihoods of the planet. And the third one is to share with you some insights with respect to a new marine reserve declaration that is being led by Belgium amongst a group of nations. With me here this morning as discussion leaders, we have the privilege of having Sophie Mirgaux, who is the senior negotiator, Ministry of the Environment of Belgium, and also the lead negotiator for the European Union on marine protected areas, Dr. Lucy Woodall, who is a researcher at Oxford University, El Embajador Juan José Gómez Camacho from Mexico, who has been very forthcoming in everything dealing with PrepCom 4 and the importance of the ocean. And I will now pass it on to them to share their insights with us. Sophie, let me first turn to you. And I would appreciate if you would please highlight the importance of PrepCom 4 and where you see this going in the next months.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Figueres, and good morning, everybody. So I will explain a little bit about where we are in the BBJ process. And how I explain it to my family, who actually are not always very aware of why I go to New York, is that in this process we have three stages. We had for years the BBJ working group, which was an informal working group where we discussed the different subjects on the agenda on biodiversity beyond national jurisdictions. And then in January 2015, we made an important step and we went to the level of the PrepCom. So we decided to have a PrepCom, a preparatory committee. Now, the preparatory committee has as a task to have recommendations on substantive elements of a draft text, so a text of the future agreement. And so that is the stage we're in now. And we are now at the fourth and final PrepCom session of this stage. And so how I always explain it is that logically there is a next stage. That is the final stage, let's say, and that is the intergovernmental conference, where the real treaty, the draft treaty, will be negotiated and in the end adopted. And so you see that we're at a very important juncture right now, because we are going to take that extra leap from the PrepCom to the intergovernmental conference. What are the topics that we are discussing? We are always calling it the package, which is the topics we agreed upon years ago. It's marine genetic resources of the high seas and the area, so of areas beyond national jurisdiction, including the sharing of benefits, of their benefits. Then we have area-based management tools, including marine protected areas, which is the main added value, let's say, within the larger spectrum of area-based management tools, is to have a strong and ambitious process to establish marine protected areas. And then we have environmental impact assessments, which are supposed to guide us on evaluating whether an activity should take place or not. And then we have two aspects which are, in my opinion, are cross-cutting and are relevant for these three subjects, which are capacity building and transfer of technology, which is very important if we want everybody to be able to both reap the benefits as well as be able to maintain the measures that we have set ourselves, or that we will have set ourselves. And then we have a more general element, which is cross-cutting issues, which can be anything leading from institutional to monitoring to enforcement, etc. So it's quite important to bring these regulations to the conservation and sustainable use of the high seas. And the reason why this is so important is that up until now, we have many, and they do good work, sectoral agreements. We have geographically limited regional agreements, but what we want here and our aim is to have an all-encompassing, I don't want to say necessarily global, because that doesn't necessarily fit what we want, but an all-encompassing solution for this. I think that now at this fourth PrepCom, all the cards are on the table. We more or less know what the positions of every delegation is. And I think what is an important message is that the Ocean Conference, which we had here in June, has confirmed again why it is so important to have this new treaty. We have the tools and we have the positions, they are now in front of us, and we need to act now, so let's do it. And I just want to say one more message here, and that is that we really want to thank Mexico's leadership on this, because you have been really instrumental to get a large group of like-minded countries, which is an overwhelming majority, to where we are now. So I really thank you for that. Gracias.
Sophie, thank you very much. Let me come back to you at the end for some thoughts and words on the Marine Reserves Declaration. But thank you for walking us through the 4 stages of the process and where we're going from here. Very important, friends, that in all the decisions that we take with respect to the ocean, we are illustrated by science. And we have the opportunity of listening here firsthand from Dr. Lucy Woodall with a new report that is coming out today, tomorrow, on the importance of the high seas and how it affects, in a positive way, if we take good care of it, the ocean as an ecosystem and life on the planet. So, Lucy, please share with us some insights on this report.
Great, thank you. It's my pleasure to be here to talk about this new report. And really the report just looks at our marine advances over the last 5 years. So both looking at the functions of the high seas, how it affects us globally, but also some of our impacts on the ocean. So the first thing I wanted to share with you was the fact that we can now recognise that the ocean is far more complex and diverse than we originally assumed. And with this, there are differences in biological life, and this is reflecting those differences in the chemistry and the physical components of different habitats. But these are all working together as a patchwork of habitats and a little network that is all interconnected. And this is incredibly important because this is far more complex and interconnected than we previously realised. And with this knowledge, we can now model any future scenarios with more certainty. However, we do realise that to understand the oceans fully, we do need to make sure we have a coordinated research programme that is multidisciplinary. So that's that first aspect. And then I'm now going to highlight a few aspects directly related to climate change, which I've pulled out, which I think you might find interesting. And then I'll talk about a developing threat. And finally, I'll finish with a little bit of my own research that I've been doing over the past 5 years. So directly related to climate change, models have shown us that there will be a change in the phytoplankton. And this is important because phytoplankton provide that primary production for our oceans. So it provides the food that gets into our food chain and also the oxygen that we're sitting here breathing. Changes to phytoplankton therefore also affect the communities of fish in the ocean and also the food that gets down into depth. So alongside this change on the surface, there's also been a change in the viruses in our water. And we've seen that there is an increase in viruses when there's also an increase in water temperature. And these viruses also include those that have human disease causing aspects. So along with these two case studies, if you like, we know that the ocean is there as a sponge for our carbon dioxide and increase in temperature. And for the ocean itself, that means that there is an acidity increase and also an increase in the presence and extent of oxygen minimum zones. So these oxygen minimum zones are incredibly important. I just want to give you an example of one, which is the Bay of Bengal. And although it's named as a bay, it's actually also got a large high seas component in it. And this suggests there might be a tipping point. And if there's further fertilizer runoff and temperature increase due to climate change, we could be looking at an extreme oxygen depleted zone. This is important twofold. There's going to be a local impact because there's a high dependency on fisheries in the area for source of protein, but also as a global impact, we suggest that there might be a change in the nitrogen cycle. So as I move along, I'm just going to say just a few words about one of the potential future threats, and this is mineral extraction. Currently, there has been studies to have a look at how this might impact on our environments, and these study sites show that there are decades-long changes. So therefore, from this information, we know how important it is to get that very fundamental baseline data. And finally, I'm going to finish on part of my own research, and that is our understanding about marine plastics. So marine plastics we generally come into contact with around the beaches once they've washed up on our shores. However, my research has been looking at the marine plastics in the high seas. We know that plastics large and small are ubiquitous in our oceans, from the surface down to the very deepest parts of the ocean and from pole to pole. I personally have seen plastics in our very remotest locations, down in the roaring 40s, in some of the places that humans don't necessarily want to go to. So over time, these large objects that we can identify break down into smaller and smaller fragments and even into fibres. However, the plastic doesn't disappear, it just gets smaller and smaller. And there's been a list now of documented evidence of these ecological impacts. And this is especially important for us to consider because the use and the manufacture of plastic is always increasing. So I've now just given you a snapshot of how our knowledge has progressed, and hopefully that will be able to highlight some of those things that we're going to talk about here in the future.
Thank you so much, Lucy,
Yeah.
for sharing insights on the report. Now that you mentioned that the plastic only gets smaller and smaller, I should remind us all that the first gram of plastic that was ever produced is still with us today, unless it has been burnt, which has even more negative impacts with respect to the environment. So the way we deal with this, looking into the future, not only in terms of our ocean, but the planet is absolutely of critical importance. Mr. Ambassador, sir, let me turn to you. Mexico has played a tremendous leadership role in bringing along nations and helping all along the way in terms of moving the process, as Sophie was calling it, forward. What do you envision in these months that we still have ahead of us when the PrepCom should deliver a final report to the General Assembly?
Yeah.
And do you see in the months ahead that we will include a call for the Intergovernmental Conference to take place in 2018, which of course would be such a very important step forward?
Thank you so much, Mr. President. Figueres, it's always an honor to see you and even more to share a table with you. Well, the concrete answer to your question is yes, absolutely. We have no doubt whatsoever that we would be calling an intergovernmental conference, and not only Mexico, but we believe all of us or most of us will work for that. Let me answer the other your more broader question from a different angle, from a more political one. There are, Mr. President, some negotiations in the UN, regional or bilateral, that are about each of us. But there are other negotiations like this one that are about all of us. And there is a fundamental difference between the two. The first ones are where we all bring our very domestic interests to pursue them, to forward them, to push them forward, and to gain the most that we can for ourselves. But there are others, like this process we are talking about, where in fact we can only gain by making sure that all of us gain. This is not about any more zero-sum games. This is about making sure that we all benefit. Why this is important and why this process is happening now? We are going through one of the most fascinating processes of change, Mr. President, in the perception of the UN about our role, which is basically recognizing that the most important challenge, the most important task that this organization has, and us as member states have here, is to make sure that we improve the quality of life of humanity. Mm-hmm. Every human being around the world has to improve the quality of his or her life, has to live in a world in peace, without conflict, etc., etc. And in order to achieve that, we finally have understood that the only way we can do it is through development. And development means many things. It has to be sustainable. It has to be for all. We all have to work together. And we can't do it without protecting the environment. And in this equation, the oceans take a prominent role, not only because we have to protect it, but also because oceans have to be a source, and by listening, my colleagues in the panel, we can only strengthen our view, has to be a source of wealth, has to be a source of knowledge, and has to be, above all, a source to improve, again, the quality of lives of everybody. So for Mexico, this process is absolutely central. And it's central not only because we have 10,000 kilometers of coastal lines, and for us, the oceans are extremely important, but because we believe that we all have a global responsibility to make sure that global resources, like the oceans, are duly protected for everyone. So what we need in this process is commitment, not only enormous technical expertise and knowledge that we can see that we are gaining and is being produced, but we will need enormous political commitment, enormous diplomatic skill, enormous technical knowledge to make sure that this is successful. Mexico is committed to it, and as I said at the beginning, Mr. President, we have no doubt that we will get through.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador, for not only very eloquent, but also palabras que nos inspiran. Señor, palabras que nos inspiran para que esto nos salga muy bien. If I may, Sophie, let me return to you. You have been working on a Marine Reserve Declaration. What is new And what should we be aware of in this new reserve declaration?
Thank you. Actually, I have to say that the idea was inspired, or the idea that inspired us to put marine reserves on our agenda as Belgium came from a workshop which I attended in Costa Rica. So under your leadership, this idea was pitched to us. Actually, we are now, so the signatories of this declaration are now Belgium, Belize, Nauru, and Portugal. And we wanted, when we were preparing for the Oceans Conference, there were a lot of commitments, national commitments that were made, national action plans that were announced, etc. And we were thinking a little bit about this, and we thought that there are a number of issues which actually require international cooperation, or where when you are only one country, you can make a small difference, but you can make a much bigger difference when you're many to do this together. And this is why we thought that a declaration to bring different countries together to put the issue of marine reserves on the international agenda and on the agenda of this BBJ PrepCom as well was a good idea. What are marine reserves? I won't go into scientific details about this because I'm sure others can do this a lot better than me. But basically, they are highly protected, very highly protected and large-scale areas. How we see this, the signatories of this declaration, is that they will be absolutely necessary if we want to reach the goals of Sustainable Development Goal 14. There is a goal, 14.5, that says that we have to have 10% of marine protected areas. We think that these 10% are not only about the quantity, but they should also be about the quality. So if these 10% are just paper parks or very low protection, this will not help us to reach the Sustainable Development Goals. We think that marine reserves not only will be a positive within this marine protected area part of the Sustainable Development Goal on oceans. We think that it is connected to all the different aspects of the goal. For example, there is a link also with another development goal on climate change. We think marine reserves will improve ocean resilience on against the negative effects of climate change. And then within Goal 14, we think that there is a link to the target on ecosystem management, on ocean acidification, on overfishing, on economic benefits for small island developing states, on small-scale fisheries. So we see this as something that can help, or we see these marine reserves as something that can help us reach the entire goal and not just the goal on the marine protected areas as such. The signatories of this declaration also think that the concept of marine reserves, of these highly protected areas, has to have a place within the future BBNJ, so this future agreement. Hence we are inviting others to co-sign this declaration, and we are definitely going to keep this momentum. We know it's an important year for oceans. We had the Ocean Conference, we have this fourth PrepCom, but we also have other ocean conferences coming ahead, in particular the Our Oceans Conference in October. So we think that there's a number of opportunities where we are going to continue promoting this declaration, and so we invite others to join.
Thank you so much, Sophie. You mentioned 10% of protected areas. By when?
By 2020.
By
So,
2020.
we have to hurry.
We have to hurry. And today we're at about 3%?
I think something like that, or even a little bit less. So.
Okay. And what are your thoughts on the goal of 30% by 2030?
I think we have to aim high, and I think, I mean, it's not just me saying this as a policy maker. I think that science has proved that this is necessary, and this is an important aspect or an important factor in us making decisions.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Something to add, Lucy?
No, I think Sophie's put it very eloquently.
Valor?
Just one thing, if I may, building on what Sophie said. The SDGs are critical, the 2030 agenda. And coming back to my original point, the whole concept of the agenda is that the agenda only makes sense if it is seen holistically. Each of the goals, each of the targets only makes sense by being reinforced by the others and reinforcing the others. So coming back to, again, to the same point, the fact that this PrepCom is taking place and eventually will have a successful BBNJ process is not only to work in favor of the oceans as we are doing it now, but it's a fundamental piece in our efforts to ensure sustainable development for all on everything in a holistic way.
Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, questions, comments? Yes, sir.
Sure. Thanks a lot. Matthew Lee, Inner City Press, on behalf of the Free UN Coastal Process. Thanks for the briefing. I was listening to it by the Security Council. I wanted to ask you about the Deepsea Mining. I heard a couple of references to it, and I guess I want to. Sitting in UN meeting rooms, you see the International Seabed Authority's nameplate, and they're here. What's the role? What's the status? I guess it sounds like people are already starting to develop. There's one off Papua New Guinea. There's some very large. What's the state of sort of science's understanding of the dangers posed by it, and the role of the UN system or the International Seabed Authority in trying to control it until more is understood about it? Mm-hmm. Thanks a lot.
Lucy?
Yeah. So there are exploration as well as exploitation licenses. We know regarding exploration that there specifically from the Pacific Ocean is where most of the research has gone ahead. And in fact, the most recent studies on a whole range of fauna, from the very small microscopic things that live in the sediment, the nematodes and the other sorts of myofauna, the very small stuff, to all of the much larger fauna that live on the seabed. There's actually lots of differences in the way that they seem to get impacted. There's also differences in how those communities are currently made up. So I think that that's why those baselines are incredibly important, because we can't necessarily say, okay, so this bit of the ocean says one thing, therefore if we go and mine this bit, then that is going to interact in a similar manner. So I think it's that complexity and that interconnected manner that is something that I would like to highlight.
Thank you. Sophie?
Thank you. I think looking at it from a policy perspective, the International Seabed Authority already has an exploration code, and they're now working on an exploitation code. And actually, it's going to come out, the first version, the draft is going to come out in summer, and then different countries and states, delegations, will have the opportunity to comment. And I mean, I don't have a crystal ball, so I don't know exactly when it will be adopted, but it could be adopted next summer, so 2018. But so the time between now and its adoption are going to be vital to try to make this code, which we have the opportunity to start from scratch, to make this code one that will last the test of time, in a sense that it will also take into account the conservation aspect.
Any other comment? Yes, sir.
Thank you, and thank you for this briefing. My name is Abadi. I'm from the paper Le Dossier. This discussion reminds me of 40 years ago when I was the head of the Sea and Ocean Affairs section, and we worked for 20 years in the Law of the Sea Conference, including with Ambassador Castañeda from Mexico, very prominent. We discussed at that time scientific research, the importance of high seas, pollution in the oceans. So what has changed since those years, apart from climate change?
Lucy?
Well,
I'm sorry, Sophie.
I wasn't born yet then, so it's easy for me to say that that this is all new, which it is obviously not. I think that it's a matter of the timing wasn't right at that point to be able to do to put conservation of the high seas or of areas beyond national jurisdiction to work the details out. I think the concept of marine protected areas was also perhaps not fully accepted or fully integrated, or in any case there was the mood was not, or the mood was not right, or the time was not right to go into details about this. The aim for the agreement now is to really have a very clear process of how to come to the establishment of marine protected areas, which is something that is not in UNCLOS. UNCLOS has provided us with some, let's say, some seeds that are there, and I think it's our job now, and it's our objective now to make those seeds into trees. Let's put it.
My point here is this. States, countries have not fully implemented the Law of the Sea Convention or the MDGs. Isn't this one of the major problems?
I think you're absolutely right in this second comment. But at the same time, what has happened since then, when we started negotiating the Law of the Sea Convention, I think the answer is very simple. We have evolved. We are truly evolving. We are evolving in knowledge, we are evolving in understanding, and we are also evolving politically. The world has not only changed in terms of our perception of the role of environment, it has changed in every possible way. It has changed in terms of development, it has changed in terms of geopolitics, it has changed, countries themselves have changed enormously. The United Nations has changed as well. So we are simply happily at a point where, as I was saying before, we are understanding that it is in our best self-interest to make sure that we all work together, to ensure that we protect the oceans, that we protect the environment, et cetera, et cetera. So I see your point, but happily we are changing, and I think we are moving forward in the right direction. Mm-hmm. We still have a lot to work. We still need plenty of efforts, and that's why we are here, no?
Please.
Just to confirm that indeed a lot has to do with political will, because that's what you're hinting at. But I think that right now the time is. I went to a briefing the other day, and there was somebody who said that it's the right time to be dealing with oceans because there's so much going on, which means at the same time there's a lot of pressure, not only amongst ourselves but also from public opinion, from NGOs, and I think this is moving us towards better implementing what is already there, but also to provide more detail. And this is actually also a crucial point, I think, for example, with regards to environmental impact assessments, which are in the oceans, in the Law of the Sea Convention. There is only one line about this, and there are not a lot of details. And sometimes when you have extra details, it makes it easier, especially if it is linked to then capacity building, this makes it easier in a sense that it is more clear what is expected from us, and so this is what we're hoping to bring to the convention.
So I would only add in a couple of minutes, if I may. I'd like to begin by thanking you for your work during those years in beginning to put the ocean on the global agenda. It has been a long process, but momentum has definitely built in most recent times. And after many years of working on climate change issues, I have the definitive impression that the upcoming thing on the environmental agenda is, of course, the ocean. In the Global Ocean Commission, where we highlighted what the drivers of degradation have been over these decades that you mentioned with respect to the ocean, we also put together 8 very clear, succinct, implementable resolutions that would drive us and would put together a rescue package for the ocean. And of course, one of those has to do with governance. And the meeting of the 4th implementing committee these days drives specifically at that issue. But thank you for your observation and your work. One last question here, perhaps, and then we'll be running out of time.
Charles Baltic Review. Although I certainly think the UN Oceans Conference was highly successful, could you provide some practical pointers for consumers, including children, on what they could do to save the oceans?
I can give it a try. I have 3 small children who I tell every day not to throw any papers or plastic wrappers or whatever on the floor or outside. I think with children, what is important is to make it very visible. And I think that the issue of marine litter is a very easy one to communicate. And for example, I mean, the High Seas Alliance actually gave us these bottles, and you will see the name of my daughter on this because I gave this to her to take to school. We have worked, for example, with I think it's called parent-teacher movement or group or something of the school, to ban plastic wrappers in the school. So the kids are supposed to bring their cookies in little cookie boxes. And I think this idea of, or this working around marine litter is a very easy way to communicate things that are close to home and that children or families can implement, and to use reusable bags or something to put their sandwiches in, etc. But I think the main thing is that we need to make it very visible for children. We need to show to them that this is, or we need to explain to them that this is something that they can actually help. And I know my son, who's 5, he says when he throws a wrapper in the bin instead of throwing in, he says, yeah, now the birds cannot eat them, they won't die, they won't have a tummy ache. So I mean, you need to bring it in a visible way. Of course, it's much more difficult to explain, for example, something very difficult like what to do against the deoxygenation of sea areas. But if you communicate it in a very visible manner and in something that is that has pointers of how we can change things in our daily lives, this can have a tremendous influence.
Lucy.
Hi there. Yeah, so I would add that we need to inspire and excite our young people, our next generation of scientists, whether that's with our oceans or going into the park and playing a game after school, if it's going into the forest and having a walk at the weekend. We've all got some space, open space around us, even if we live in cities. And I think that's the most important thing. I got inspired as a scientist having a look around rock pools along the coast when I was a small child. And that's why I'm sat here today. So that's what I'd suggest. Make them smile.
Great.
Can I say quickly something?
Por supuesto,
Mr.
señor.
Presidente. No, very quickly, because this is a very interesting point. And in fact, we have been working very much in Mexico on this. It goes in the same package, if you like, oceans with SDGs. The real challenge, apart from codification, is how we turn these new codification, laws, regulations into public policy. And countries have to accept, adopt this, and translate it into public policy. And after it is public policy, the biggest challenge is how can we ensure that societies appropriate this public policy. Yeah. And one of the vehicles to this appropriation that in a way goes together with what Sophie was saying is education. And we've been working, in fact, in Mexico in training through pilot programs, in training teachers in primary school, not only as a question of bringing as a subject the SDGs or within X subject to talk about the SDGs, but use the SDGs as a sort of conducting element across the board so kids appropriate themselves of these SDGs. And by the way, the additional value added of this, which is probably the most important, is that then when the society appropriates of all of this, let's talk about now BBNG and the protection of the oceans, is that society becomes the first and the main guarantor of the authorities' conduct on all this, making sure that the authorities actually fulfill these commitments. So and this is how we see it and how we are working in Mexico on this.
Thank you very much. We're running out of time. I want to thank you all for being here this morning. Thank you, Lucy. Thank you, Sophie. Embajador, muchísimas gracias. Muy amable. See you in the PrepCom.
Thank you.
Gracias.